Hi, my name is Laura Lee Gablesberg, and this presentation was originally scheduled for the Sunset Spiritualist Church Camp of 2026. Yay! This was originally titled Becoming Citizens of the Cosmos, Understanding Your Planetary Committee. Well, the universe had other plans. We had storms that knocked out power at camp, so camp was closed a little early. So I'm sending out this post-storm video as a substitute for the presentation, and I hope you enjoy it. I want to take a moment to thank the church and the participants for welcoming me into this community. Now is for the third summer that I was able to come and attend, and I'm looking forward to many future gatherings and exchanges. And so, with that said, let's dive into our topic. Okay. I think most people I talk to are quite bewildered by the times that we're living through. So I'd like to start with a brief chat about the current cosmic weather. So what's going on right now is that we have the outer planets Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus are moving into this arrangement where they're all at 4 degrees of their respective signs, and then Mars is conjunct Uranus on July 4th. Uranus in Gemini is already historically a time when the United States has been at war. So, for example, Uranus was in Gemini at the time of the American Revolution, and it was in Gemini at the time of the start of the Civil War, and so on. And when you look through history at all the times that we've been drawn into conflicts, really serious conflicts or wars, Uranus is in Gemini in many of those situations. And so there's that. But then there's this connection to the Jupiter cycle. So 6 years is half of a Jupiter cycle, and that relates back to April 5th of 2020 and the time of the lockdowns, or shortly after the time that most of us here in the United States went on lockdown. So that's something significant. But based on the arrangement, there are some folks saying that there could be some heavy-handed law that comes out or some fanatical ideology that could result because we have the Uranus, which is the planet of rebellion and revolutions, and Neptune, which is the planet of illusions and deception. So, whatever happens, this time period in July is going to be probably containing some of the more interesting moments of 2026, some of the more pivotal events. So, following that Mars Uranus conjunction in Gemini on July 4th, which is our nation's birthday, and then the United States already typically being at war, coupled with the Jupiter opposition lining up with what had happened 6 years ago during COVID lockdowns. So that's kind of a picture. Not saying I know what's going to happen. I don't think any astrologer does. And people are a little bit on the edge of their seats watching how will this unfold for next month and how will that carry out through the rest of the year. So my main intention for you today with this presentation is that you might come away with it understanding your planetary committee of guides better. Have you ever paused during a stressful moment and wondered, whoa, where did that reaction come from? Who exactly is running my control room in my head right now? We all like to think that we're in complete control, but the truth is, every single one of us has a committee of voices in our heads. As citizens of the cosmos, we can become better aware of the committee of voices. Last summer, I had the pleasure of attending some really wonderful sessions with Michelle Wisbeth, who then later led me through a few more private sessions over Zoom, teaching me about the 5 guides. As we worked with these guides, it occurred to me that they each had a planetary correspondence. So I want to give credit here to Michelle Wisbeth. I'm building on to some of the things that she shared with me and adding on the layer of astrology to it. When people first encounter astrology, they learn about the sun signs, and that's not wrong. We must learn the alphabet first. The sun and the moon together symbolize our unique blend of eternal spirit and soul. The circle with the dot of the sun is the eternal spirit of all and the drop of our essence inside. The moon represents the chalice or the crescent of the soul, this incarnation, and everything that we interpret must go through those two lenses, the father principle and the mother principle. And the light, it's the light through which we understand the messages of our guides. The sun and the moon play an extremely important role in our consciousness. But today I'm going to be focusing on the 5 planets, the 5 visible planets of the classical astrology. Since I won't be focusing on this on my talk, I created a digital handout for the sun and the moon, which I will share with you at the end. If you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, this illustrates the often conflicting internal committee of voices beautifully. We're going to take this a little bit further. Okay, so if the planets and the guides that they represent were altogether a university, then and you pictured the planets as they stretch out from the sun all the way out to Saturn, Saturn would be the furthest away, and it's sort of the chancellor that oversees the whole university. It does not deal with the students daily. He's much more remote. Saturn might design the graduation requirements and the structure of the programs that are offered at the university. Then you'd move in a little bit closer to the day-to-day operations of the university, and you'd have Jupiter, which would be like the dean of academic affairs who oversees the departments. He's the doctor teacher, where Saturn is the master guide. Okay. If you go a little further in, you're going to cross that asteroid belt, and you would reach Mars, who is the protector, really literally defending Earth against the onslaught of falling debris and space matter. um, the protector might be, on our university analogy, like a coach or a campus security, and it defends that which we hold dear and what we value, standing up for ourselves. Then we have Mercury and Venus. Mercury is sort of the academic advisor or the registrar, managing inflow and outflow, helping you balance your course load, taking in the money, participating in commerce between you and the university, and checking you in and checking you out, so to speak, the go-between. Venus would be the joy guide and the campus or student life director, ensuring that the students are having fun, that you're having fun, and that your well-being is in their best interest. And so these 5 guides, Michelle Wisbeth had given the different names that are below them. So Master Guide, she had given Doctor Teacher as the next indication, Joy Guide, the Chemist, and she used that term, the Protector. So Saturn and Jupiter are on that far end of the visible side of what we can see with the naked eye. And the two symbols for Saturn and Jupiter, I think it's fascinating that they are the same, but flipped vertically and horizontally. So Jupiter is the one that looks like the number 4, and Saturn is the one that looks like an H. But if you flip them, they're pretty much like a mirrored image in a way. They form a polarity of growth together. Jupiter is like this principle of expansion and generating new connections and new things, branching out into new fields. And Saturn is like when a farmer prunes and cuts back all of the dead growth, and it's a contraction or a pulling back. And we need both in our lives. We need to sort of clear the clutter when things become overwhelming, and we also need to branch out into new directions when it's the right time. So there's an alternation between Jupiter and Saturn that forms a nice, what I call the polarity of growth. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about each of the planetary guides now, and kind of break each one down in turn. One of the things that I think is so amazing about just life on Earth and human beings in general is that even though we're so very different and our lives can be very different, our experiences can be very different, but all of us, every human being on the planet will go through the same sequence of transits throughout their lives. And so we have some predictable framework which astrologers can work with and which anyone can work with when we know what that structure is. And so it all relates to the orbit around the sun and how long it takes these planets to return to their position where they were when we were born, or return to that natal position. So let's take Saturn, for example. So Saturn is shown on the bottom half of this timeline in white. And it has if you wanted to round out, a 30-year cycle, right? And so if someone lives a very long life, they might have 3 Saturn cycles, living to about the age of 90. But you can break the Saturn cycle down even further into like half-hour marks, right? So if an hour was a whole revolution, a halfway point would be like the opposition. Okay, so at ages 14, you would have a Saturn opposition. At age 42, you'd have a Saturn opposition. And even further, you can break it down into quarter hours, which would be the squares. So like a Saturn square would occur at the age of 7. Okay, these are common mile markers that we all share. And they're notable because they even affect the physical body, such as at the age of 7, we have the losing of the milk teeth. And Saturn represents the mineralization of the body and the skeletal structure, right? And so we have these predictable patterns that show up in the body and that show up in astrology. Okay, so now let's look at the yellow line at the top. So Jupiter has a 12-year cycle, and this is usually related to new periods of growth. So like at your first Jupiter return at the age of 12, we have the onset of puberty, and we have this massive gearing up of the sexual organs and the maturation process for both men and women. And the whole gamut that brings for people when they are going through puberty. And for each successive Jupiter cycle, there's a new stage of growth beginning. Okay, so if you look at across a human lifespan, you're going to see, as these 2 cycles come together, or you stack them on top of each other, where we're going to have some like really busy time periods. In particular, you can see during the time period of around the age of 60, and also around the age of 27 to 28, 29, these are big turning points in life where big decisions have to be made, and that can really affect the course of all the things that come after that. Of course, there are things that lead up to this, but I love looking at this in terms of, we all share this human biography, this human journey, and what type of journey did you make it? What decisions did you make at 27? What decisions did you make at 44? And how did that impact where you are today? So that's one of the things I love about the study of our biographies as it relates to the planets. So now we're going to hop on board the spaceship, and we're going to visit each of these planets one by one and talk to these planetary guides to see what more we can learn about the committee of voices we have going on our control panel. All right, so the symbol of Saturn is that cross of matter over the crescent of the soul. And so this relates to the story of Kronos and Uranus. Now, Kronos was the son of Uranus, and he staged a rebellion of sorts and severed the testicles of his father, Uranus, who was the sky god. Now, the sky god represents like sky consciousness, or the idea of something coming before the materialization of something. And so Saturn castrating sky consciousness, you could think of it as symbolizing a disabling of God consciousness. That meaning like God consciousness on some level doesn't operate with the same rules anymore, right? So if the thought comes first and then the idea becomes materialized, Saturn represents then the harvest, or the bringing it in, and the structure, restrictions, and the boundaries of reality. So in that myth of Saturn overpowering Uranus and overpowering the ideal with the limits of what the physical world brings. But ironically, Saturn becomes just as oppressive as his own father was. And he began to fear a prophecy that his own children would overthrow him. And so he began to swallow his children. And he swallowed them whole. And eventually he was overthrown by his own son, Zeus, Jupiter, with the help of his mother. The metal that's associated with Saturn uh, in all of this, each planet has a metal associated with it, and for Saturn, it's lead. And lead is heavy and dense, and it can protect against radiation. Like when we go in and put on that thing that they cover you up with to take an X-ray, and then it's remarkably soft, and it has this low melting point. But in physics, lead is this retirement home for unstable elements. Like all the radioactive elements keep decaying, and they take billions of years to decay. But by the time they've gone through all those transformations, they reach lead. All of that stops because lead has a stable nucleus, which Saturn is very stable and structured. It doesn't decay further. It's the dead end of the radioactive graveyard of the periodic table. Saturn's also the last planet that's away from us that we can see visibly with the naked eye, and that's important to astrologers. Okay, so Saturn has this 29-year cycle. So I've stripped that timeline down just to show that 30 or rounded up to 30-year cycle, 29 to 30-year cycle. And when we complete that first Saturn return, we truly enter adulthood, right? Our 30s now, you're really truly an adult. And during that time, there can be a reawakening or a realignment, a checkpoint to that master plan that our master guide has set out for us. Sometimes for young adults, this can bring about a sudden 180, like a sudden reckoning, like, oh no, I was going this way, but now I need to go that way. And that's what I really want over there. It can also bring other things, unexpected things too, but it's a big reawakening to what's the purpose of this lifetime. When we get to our second Saturn return at the age of about 60, often in biographies of famous people, we see like the masterpiece being published, a major thesis, or scientists or artists being recognized or winning the Nobel Prize or other types of culminating types of accomplishments. So this is a time in life where whatever was built before is tested, corrected, refined, and if you worked hard and you did the right things, you're rewarded. If we hold tight to that master plan, it all works out great. And if we don't, if we stray off from that, then we face the consequences or the difficulties of life based on how well we held true to that master plan. All right, so if you're lucky enough to celebrate your third Saturn return and you're in your early 90s or your late 80s, there may be a new spiritualization of what was manifested from the previous cycles. And we can learn about that by talking to people about their biographies and studying biographies of famous people, looking at their writings or poems or things that they say or their philosophy of life and so forth. There's often more of a deepening or a spiritualization of leaving a legacy behind. Always think of that expression, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. Even the hardest minerals can be ground down through Earth's long processes and become sand or dust. And in order to build something that truly lasts the test of time, you have to build spiritual currency into it. And that's what Saturn is wanting from us. It wants us to build slow. It wants us to go through tests to build up the reliability of things. It wants to give us obstacles that make us stronger, where we have to practice patience and be practical, where we can learn about authority. Often getting married and getting a job can go together with big Saturn transits because it changes your role in society and your sense of leadership of others, and that sense of authority is pulled into play there. And also, Saturn relates to areas where we have to apply effort in life to get the results that we want. want. Okay, so one thing that I forgot to say about Saturn is that the other planetary guides report to Saturn. Just like our organs and all of the tissues of the body have to work within the structure of the skeleton, the other planetary bodies also must work within the structure that Saturn gives to the life. And we have a dancing skeleton to try to give a little bit more levity here. Um, I couldn't resist adding this animation, but it's actually like everything that's opposite to Saturn because really Saturnian subjects are heavy, serious, burdensome, difficult, things that require discipline over time. And relating to the bones is where it's at. So in coming back to our spiritual celestial committee of 5 guides, we've talked about Saturn, the master guide, as being the chancellor of our planetary university. So now I'm going to turn to the dean of our academic affairs, our illustrious planetary guide, the great and expansive Jupiter, the doctor teacher. Okay, so as I mentioned before, Zeus Jupiter comes along, and with the help of his mother, he frees his brother Poseidon, Neptune, and Hades, Pluto, from the belly of Saturn or Kronos. And by unleashing these older supernatural powers, Jupiter overcomes Saturn. Jupiter, it relates to Sagittarius and the stories of the centaurs, and Chiron, the half horse, half man. This speaks of the integration of the higher self and the lower nature, or the higher nature and lower nature. It's also Jupiter's role to carry out Saturn's plans and manage the experiences that we undertake for growth. It relates to lightning and the liver, which is an organ that plans for the future. Okay. The element of Jupiter is the ether or the fifth element. So we have fire, earth, water, and air, but there's also the spaces or the void, the upper air. Not really nothingness, but rather like potential, like this field of potential. And Jupiter is associated with that. The metal for Jupiter is tin, which happens to be the glue of technology. It's used in soldering electronics. And so you see that relationship to the lightning and the electricity once again. It's used in making alloys. The glyph of Jupiter is this crescent of the soul turned on its side and joined to the cross of matter. You can almost see the same relationship of the glyph in this statue that's next to it there, right? The holding of the staff upward. In the esoteric anatomy, Jupiter relates to the hips, the thighs, the buttocks, the sacrum, and as I said before, in the liver, which is quite a large organ in the body. It has that 12-year cycle, and it relates to our verticality, our ability to be upright. That's what the role of the sacrum is. It can relate to the sense of touch, and we know that if a human is not touched or held enough, that can really inhibit a lot of their development and growth as young babies who are neglected or abandoned have shown anecdotally. Jupiter is our doctor teacher, and so it's the guru, the hierophant. And this doctor dwells on both the esoteric and higher reasons for the illness, as well as the lower material or physical manifestations of the illness, and can minister to both. We know that mind body has these connections, that our thoughts influence the body and the way that our cells interact. And so this is one of the Jupiterian principles. The challenge is to integrate the higher nature and the lower nature, right? Zeus was known for having many affairs and for angering Hera. And in our lower nature, we might want to eat all the time and have sex all the time. So it's like the mastery of the body and the urges of the body. But there's a higher side to this. There's law, morality, religion, philosophy, and the organizing powers of thought, which I see as being linked to that story where he organizes with his mother, plans for the right time, and frees his brothers from Saturn for the right reasons, and everything is restored to the way it needs to be. This kind of shows us Jupiter's power of organizing society through brotherhood and through overcoming the challenges of the physical world. But not knowing one's limits with Saturn can result in many kinds of problems. And this is sort of part of the nature of their polarity together. Jupiter relates to good luck, gifts, opportunities, and meetings with destiny. Okay, so coming back to our planetary picture, if we were way out in the field of Saturn and we were moving inward towards the Earth and we had passed Jupiter, then the next thing we would come to is that asteroid belt that sits between Jupiter and Mars, and it's just this field full of debris. And what stands there between us and that field of debris is our protector, the planetary guide of Mars. So we'll talk about Mars for a second. Mars is the protector. It's like campus security, defender of the campus boundaries, but also the coach who drives you to get in shape. That is the element of iron. It relates to fire. It is the circle of spirit with the cross of matter. And the cross of matter is turned outward like an arrow. It's sort of the warrior principle. And so I put the picture of the Roman god, or god that we think of as Ares, the god of war. It relates to the gallbladder, and so this green pepper-like looking structure is the gallbladder, and it puts that gall. And when someone has a lot of gall, they have audacity, right? They have gumption, and that's a Mars force. We need it to meet the world with action. Somebody with a strong Mars is going to get things done, get her done. Pumping iron at the gym is a very Martian thing to do. And a note about people and their cars. A car is a solid piece of iron with a combustible engine, or it used to be a solid piece of iron, with a combustible engine that's used for movement. Okay, and as such, cars relate to Mars. Race car drivers and martial artists have very well placed Mars, but driving a car can bring out road rage and violence in some people. And it can also, if a person has a poorly placed Mars, it can mean that they are really fearful of driving. So just to note how they connect. Anyone who has dealt with a 2-year-old understands the influence of Mars because they hit that terrible twos. And Mars has a 26-month cycle, so just a little more than 2 years. But this is when a child first learns to say no loudly, and it relates directly to the first Mars return. So understanding your Mars can help you understand what you're willing to fight for and how that expresses in your biography. Mars gets vilified unjustly, I think. We need our Mars, or else nothing would ever get done. But Mars needs meaningful challenges, and without them, it tends to be destructive to itself and to others. Mars needs the guidance of Venus to give it a higher purpose. I like to use the acronym PITCH when I think of Mars. First, because it's an athletic thing and it's sending it out there like the glyph shows, the arrow, and it stands for things that relate to Mars as being physical. It can lead to injury in some cases. It also relates to movement and travel, conflict, and hustle, getting things done. So I'm going to jump now straight to Venus. When I think of Venus, I often picture Botticelli's Birth of Aphrodite. She rises from the sea foam, and we could equally think of this beautiful piece of art, right? Anything that's of an artistic nature is Venusian. From mythology, the goddess of love and beauty arose from the castrated genitals of Uranus, and she predated Zeus, right? So she's also one of the older goddesses, gods and goddesses. So stories that relate to Venus are also the story of Adam and Eve, and the serpent and the apple, and the separation of the Adam Eve hermaphrodite into the separate sexes. Right. In our university analogy, Venus's role is that of the campus life director. She makes life worth living. She's our joy guide, assisting us in achieving that which brings pleasure and makes life worth the struggle. It guides us to that which gives life and it gives it value. So if it's adding something that's refined or valued or treasured, all creativity, including our ability to enjoy the arts, which are expressions of beauty, order, and refinement, and our ability to sexually procreate, is related to Venus. This ties to the larynx and the throat as the power of the creative word. And we're also attracted to these things so much so that we may not even really think about it. Okay, so the glyph of Venus is shown in green. It's the circle of spirit above the cross of matter. And the metal is copper, which is a warm and electrically conductive material. It's highly malleable, so it can be used for all sorts of things. And astrologically, Venus rules the two signs of Taurus and Libra. I forgot to mention Mars rules the signs of Scorpio and Aries. Okay, so Venus is birthed in the sea foam, and she's the sexual quintessence, or the concentrated sexual essence. And in the body, the Venus organ is the kidney, which maintains all of the bodily fluids. And so it controls the balance of astral and etheric in fluid form. And this is mirrored in the throat, the larynx, the hair, the sexual organs, and it's connected to our feet. Both the male and the female genitals begin in the kidneys during fetal gestation, and so the differences in our voices are due to our hormones, but our feet relate to water and to universal love. Kidneys relate to the refinement and the purification of the substances into the waters of life. All right, so the libido, or like our sexual drive, is an expression of both Mars and Venus in balance. And so we all have a Mars, we all have a Venus. Okay, the Venus planet also relates to veins, which return the fluid passively from the feet, from the periphery back to the center, whereas Mars is a function of the arteries, is pushing outward and down actively. And Venus pulls it back up passively. So Venus is in rulership in the sign of Libra, which is the hips and also where the sexual organs are stored, and Taurus, where the male-female voice expresses itself. Okay, so Venus takes a lot of joy when we do things that awaken the larynx, like humming, buzzing, throat friction, singing, a good conversation, laughter, and even crying. Venus has a quite short cycle, so we consult Venus when it comes to our joy and our happiness. Her path or her orbit is a complex topic, but we had the special privilege during the week of camp to have Venus and Jupiter together in the sky, visible at sunset, and they were placed together in the sign of Cancer. And so you see this five-pointed star, and of course, when Venus travels through its cycle, it traces the path of this beautiful five-pointed flower or star. And so the house where your natal Venus is located, it can indicate where you seek to find joy and to create beauty. The sign of your natal Venus can indicate your aesthetic temperament and what you find attractive. So when we put Venus in Cancer in our current transit that we experienced this month, we might be seeking that area of life that relates to family or the heart, coming home or home comforts of home as a way to develop our joy. So Venus's cycle is 18 months long, and that star pattern occurs over an 8-year time period. The last in our tour of the 5 planets is Mercury. In our university analogy, Mercury is the academic advisor, the go-between for the student and the higher administration. Mercury translates the chancellor's degree plan and the dean's curriculum into a usable schedule for you. Without that, we wouldn't have communication flowing between you and your higher goals, and it wouldn't work in the daily life. So it has a really important role when you think about it. In anatomy, Mercury relates to several things: the iliac bones of the hips, the shoulder blades, and the sphenoid bone in the cranial floor, which harbors the pituitary gland. And that has close connections to the third eye, communication with other realms. Mercury relates to the lungs, air and wind, excuse me, and the colon or gas production. It's the largest organ of the body, and so it surrounds the heart and it's the wings of the heart. It provides linkages to spiritual beings. The related stories with Mercury are the Greek Hermes stories, the trickster tales of all sorts of different traditions, the Norse god Loki, the Egyptian god Thoth, Anansi spider, and so many other trickster type tales. If you can quick check your Mercury, it has a very short cycle. About every 40 minutes, you have a switching of the airflow between the left side and the right side. So if you want to know which side is dominant at the time, just breathe out onto your index finger below your nose, and you can tell which side has greater airflow, the left nostril or the right nostril. And that quantity of air is quite noticeable. So Mercury's job is to be that go-between between the left, the moon side, and the Pingala, the right side, the Ida and the Pingala, and it goes between heaven and earth. It has to regulate and balance the movement and the air, and thus the wings and the back and the forth and the creating of movement. The caduceus came to represent the symbol of health because of the integration of left and right, the spinal column and the brain and nervous system as the central channel with its chakra centers. Your natal Mercury placement in a particular zodiac sign will give indications that the mind and body requires to maintain a healthy integration of your nervous and digestive system. And Mercury is never more than 28 degrees away from the sun. And the sun represents our vitality and our purpose. So it's there to support that vitality. Mercury contributes to your mental chemistry. If Mercury is ahead of the sun, it's considered fast and Promethean. If it's slow and it's behind the sun, it's considered reflective and Epimethean. But really, even though Mercury has a fairly fast cycle, an 88-day cycle, we really only need to think of the season that we were born into. If you were born in the spring, summer, winter, or fall. So if you're born in the spring, you require high growth and high activity. If you were born in the summer, this relates to creative reproduction, the creation of fruits, right? So the creative reproduction is communing with others. It's a time of coming together and that high relationship time. In the fall, if you're born in the fall, this is a time relating to harvesting, yielding, preparing, and organizing for the winter, sort of culling. And then winter is a time of rest, internalization, woodshedding, planning for the next year. Because the Mercury cycle is so short, it's only 88 days, it relates to short-term habits. And you can use Mercury cycles for short-term goals and for planning. You can use retrogrades to review your goals and reflect on all the information before you set new goals and make new commitments. I don't buy into Mercury retrogrades as being a time to be fearful at all. Used well, it can be a great time period for gathering your information. and that's how I use it. So 3 retrogrades happen 3 times a year, and it's going to happen every year, folks. So let's not get up in arms when Mercury's in retrograde. It's just not that big of a deal. But things that relate in threes have a mercurial quality to them. So plants that have 6 petals or 3 petals, or shapes in nature that have threes, it relates to redoing, reviewing, or recycling, and you want to use Mercury cycles for those purposes. Okay, citizens, we have taken a look now at all 5 of our planetary guides on your committee. At this point, I was making a note to stop for questions, and this is a lot of information, but I'm hoping it gives you a good understanding of the vocabulary of what these planetary guides represent. So just to recap, Saturn is your 29-year cycle. It completes its orbit in that time period, and it's the great thresholds of maturity, the maturation process. And each return reshapes our identity, demanding greater accountability, structure, and earned wisdom. The Saturn return is not punishment, it is an initiation. Jupiter has that 12-year cycle, and it completes its orbit every 12 years, opening new chapters of growth, learning, and expansion. And each return brings a fresh period of seeking. New teachers appear, wisdom teeth emerge. The mind hungers for higher learning and understanding. Okay, if you know the sign of your ascendant, you can look down this list for the Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Cancer and how that would relate to the gifts or opportunities and what areas of life they might be appearing for you at this time in June. Just like seeking the good advice of a doctor, a professional, or a friend, we have to ask the right questions and to the right planetary guide at the right time and in the right way. And by asking better questions, we get better results. And alignment is just allowment. If we're in alignment, then we're allowing things to flow through that were meant to come through. Change doesn't really demand force, it flows from alignment. And the miracle is already waiting within the question itself before it's even asked. This just about wraps things up for me. If you scan the QR codes here, you will be able to open up these slides for yourself, and there's a handout that goes with the 5 planetary guides, as well as a little bit more about the sun and the moon in astrology. I also wanted to let you know that some people in this audience might be interested in a Substack article that I wrote about Victoria Woodhull. I used Barbara Goldsmith's biography compilation of people who were around during the age of suffrage and the rise of spiritualism, and it's mainly about the scandalous life of Victoria Woodhull. I love the word audacity. I think she just was a woman of sheer audacity. So I did a workup of her astrology in this article, which I just mentioned because I thought some of you might be interested, and you can check that out on my Substack. As we close up this time together, may we all walk forward with gratitude and awareness that these planets are guiding us, supporting us, and blessing us. And may we shine with that confidence, knowing that they have our backs always.